The waltz begins. Warren leads Nadine onto the dance floor. Claire lowers herself into the nearest chair. No one sees her hands shaking.
Mẹ con mình vẫn ổn mà.
The zipper stuck. It always stuck at the same spot, right between her shoulder blades. That one stubborn inch of fabric that refused to cooperate on the nights that mattered most. Claire reached behind her back. She tried again. The zipper held. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror in Suite 3204 of the Ashworth Grand Hotel, 32 floors above the city. The room smelled of Warren's cologne and the white roses he had ordered, because he always ordered white roses and never once asked if she preferred something else. She tried the zipper a third time. It gave. The midnight blue gown settled against her body, custom made, specifically designed to accommodate the curve of her belly and still make her look, as Warren had put it last week while reviewing her options, presentable. Presentable. She had smiled and said thank you. She was 7 months pregnant. She had carried this child through morning sickness so brutal she lost 11 pounds in the first trimester, through a subchorionic hemorrhage scare at 16 weeks that put her on bed rest for 9 days, through the kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones. Through all of it, she had managed every detail of this foundation gala. The venue, the caterers, the donor correspondence, the seating chart, the florals. And Warren's word for how she looked tonight was presentable. She looked at her reflection. 33 years old, dark hair pinned up, a face she had stopped examining too closely because examining it too closely led to thoughts she did not have time for. She looked fine. She looked more than fine, actually. She looked like a woman who had learned to make herself invisible inside her own beauty, which was a particular kind of skill that nobody congratulated you for. Warren appeared in the bathroom doorway. Black tie, silver cufflinks, the jaw she had fallen in love with at a charity auction 6 years ago. He looked at her reflection in the mirror the way he looked at the lobby of this hotel, checking, assessing, satisfied with the general condition of the asset. "You look nice, Claire," he said. "Not beautiful, not stunning, not you take my breath away." "Nice, thank you," she said. He patted his jacket pocket, checked his phone. The screen lit his face blue for a moment. "Car's downstairs in 7 minutes," he said. He left the bathroom. She heard him in the bedroom, the sound of his watch being fastened, the drawer closing, the particular silence of a man who has already moved on to the next thing before the current thing is finished. Claire looked at herself for another moment. Then she turned and straightened his jacket where it hung on the back of the door. She did it without thinking, the way you smooth a pillow, the way you close a cabinet someone left open. 3 years of marriage had given her these small automatic gestures, the straightening, the smoothing, the picking up of things left behind. She checked the pockets, the left pocket, empty the right pocket. Her fingers closed around something small, cold, with a tiny diamond at the center, an earring. She held it in her palm and looked at it under the bathroom light. Small, modern, a delicate drop style with a pavé diamond setting. The kind of earring a woman chooses for herself, not the kind a man buys. She knew every piece of jewelry she owned. Warren had purchased most of it. She had a catalog of it in her mind the way she had a catalog of everything in her life. Precise, thorough. Lawyerly, Petra always said, even now. This earring was not from her collection. She stood very still. The name came to her before the thought did, before she had even formed the question properly, before she had constructed the logic that would lead from an unfamiliar earring to a specific name, Nadine. She stopped. She set the earring on the marble counter. She looked at it for 3 seconds. She picked up her evening bag. She placed the earring inside. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the lobby button. The doors closed. Her face in the mirrored elevator doors was completely calm. She had been a litigator for 9 years. She had learned in her first year of practice that the most important skill in a courtroom was not argument. It was not preparation. It was not even intelligence. It was the ability to feel nothing on your face while everything was happening inside. She had that skill. She had always had it. She used it now. The lobby of the Ashworth Grand was all white marble and gold fixtures, and the hushed, expensive sound of a fountain that had been imported from a hotel in Milan that Warren had bought and subsequently sold at a 40% profit. The annual Ashworth Foundation Gala was already well underway. 300 guests. The who's who of the city's business and philanthropic world. Warren was already working the room before they reached the coat check. She had watched him do this for 4 consecutive galas. He moved through a crowd the way water moves through a landscape, finding every channel, filling every space, his hand on someone's shoulder, his laugh arriving precisely on cue, his eyes scanning ahead to the next person while still appearing fully present with the current one. He was extraordinary at it. She used to find it thrilling, Standing next to him at these events, feeling the warmth of his attention when it turned toward her, feeling chosen. She took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. She looked across the room and she saw Nadine Cross, standing near the bar, in a red dress, hair down, one hand wrapped around a champagne flute, laughing at something the man next to her had said, with one bare earlobe. Claire did not faint. She did not drop her glass. She did not make a sound. She did not allow a single muscle in her face to move. She turned. She walked to the nearest marble pillar. She stood behind it. She breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the midwife had taught her at 16 weeks, when the bleeding started and fear was a physical thing in the room with them. The baby shifted, a small foot pressing against her lower ribs, gentle as if to say, I know. I am here too. Claire pressed her free hand to her belly. She stood behind that pillar for 45 seconds. She counted them. Then she straightened her spine. She walked back into the gala. She smiled at the first person who greeted her. She was warm. She asked about their daughter's college applications. She touched the woman's arm. She laughed at the right moment. She was the picture of a gracious, glowing 7 months pregnant wife. And she was memorizing everything. The angle of Nadine's body toward the room. The way Nadine's eyes moved every few minutes to a point slightly to Claire's left. Claire did not turn to verify. She already knew what was to her left. Warren. Nadine's eyes found Warren every few minutes with the automatic quality of a compass finding north. Not furtive. Not guilty. Just habitual. The way you glance towards someone you know so well that checking on them has become involuntary. Like a woman glancing at something she already considers hers. The mirror moment of this chapter is this: Claire standing in the elevator, holding the evening bag, pressing the lobby button with the hand that is not yet shaking. Every woman who has ever found something she was not supposed to find knows exactly what that elevator ride felt like. The 30 seconds between knowing and having to decide what to do with knowing. The longest 30 seconds. The ones that divide your life into a before and an after, whether you want them to or not. Claire rode that elevator down, and she chose to know. The Ashworth Foundation Gala happened every November. Claire had attended 4 of them. This was the 5th. She stood at her assigned table with a smile in place and started remembering. In order. The way she used to organize a deposition. Chronologically. Without emotion attached to the facts. Year 1. They had been dating 8 months. Warren introduced her to everyone as if presenting something magnificent to people who did not yet know they needed it. His hand never left the small of her back. She felt chosen. She felt seen. She felt like the luckiest woman in the room. Year 2. Engaged. Sapphire ring. Women she had never met hugged her and said, "You are so lucky." She agreed with them. She meant it. Year 3. Married 8 months. Her photograph was on every piece of the foundation's promotional material. Warren's wife. Warren's world. She had started scaling back her caseload, then stopped taking new clients, then let her assistant go. It happened gradually, the way all large changes happen. So slowly you do not notice until the landscape looks entirely different. Year 4. 3 months pregnant, exhausted. Warren told her she did not need to come if she was feeling poorly. She came anyway. She noticed for the first time that he arrived before her. She noticed that the event had a new coordinator, a woman she had not met, efficient, polished. Nadine Cross, VP of the hotel division, recommended by Warren himself. She had shaken Nadine's hand and thought nothing of it. Year 5. Tonight. An earring in her husband's pocket. A woman at the bar with one bare earlobe. How long, she thought. Not as a trembling question. As a prosecutor establishing a timeline. How long? She moved through the room. She spoke to people. She was excellent at this. The corporate litigator in her had never entirely gone to sleep, even after 3 years of running households and managing charitable committees. She could hold a conversation and think simultaneously. She had always been able to do that. She found her assigned seat. She sat, her feet ached. The baby was active tonight. Little insistent movements she had learned to read over these 7 months. Not distress, just awareness. The baby was always aware of tension in her body before she consciously registered it herself. Ruth Ashworth materialized at her elbow. Warren's mother was 71 years old. She had the bearing of a woman who had been trained from childhood to take up exactly as much space as was appropriate and not a fraction more. She wore charcoal gray and a single strand of pearls that had belonged to her mother. She sat next to Claire without asking, which was something Ruth always did. Sat without asking. As if occupying space was simply a matter of deciding to. She did not look at Claire immediately. She looked at the room, at the crowd, at Warren working the room near the main bar. Then her gaze moved almost imperceptibly to Nadine. Then she looked at Claire. "Yeah, found out tonight," Ruth said quietly. Not a question. A statement delivered with the care of someone who has been waiting to deliver it. Claire turned to look at her mother-in-law fully. "How long have you known?" Ruth set her champagne flute down with precision. "Long enough to be ashamed of my son." The words landed without drama, clean and terrible. "Did you know before the wedding?" Claire asked. A pause. One beat. One beat too long. "I had suspicions," Ruth said. "Not certainties." "And you said nothing. I hoped I was wrong." Ruth did not flinch. She had the kind of spine that did not flinch. "I was not wrong." "I am sorry, Claire. That is inadequate." "I know that." Claire looked at her for a long moment. She did not say it is fine because it was not fine. She did not say I understand because she was not ready to understand yet. "Will he make a mistake tonight?" she asked instead. Ruth looked at her with an expression that was close to respect. "He always does. When he believes no one relevant is watching. He has never considered you a threat." She paused. "That is his most significant error. Why are you telling me this now?" Ruth placed one thin, dry hand over Claire's. The gesture was awkward. Ruth was not a woman who touched people easily. The awkwardness made it more honest somehow. "Because you deserve better than I gave my son," Ruth said. "And so does that baby." Claire looked down at Ruth's hand on hers. She thought about all the dinners, all the holiday gatherings, all the events where Ruth had been cool and correct and never unkind and never particularly warm. She had assumed it was the particular variety of reserve that wealthy older women sometimes wore like armor. Now she understood it differently. Ruth had been watching, waiting, carrying the knowledge of what her son was and hating herself for the carrying. "Okay," Claire said. That was all she said. She did not absolve Ruth. She did not condemn her. She simply said okay and turned back to the room and began, very quietly and very methodically, to observe everything. She watched Nadine for 11 minutes while appearing to give her full attention to the woman on her left, who was explaining a recent trip to Tuscany. In 11 minutes, she noted the following. Nadine greeted 17 people. She knew all of them by name. These were not casual acquaintances. These were the Foundation's key donors and board members. People Claire had spent 3 years cultivating relationships with on the Foundation's behalf. People who now visibly enjoyed Nadine's company. She had been building this network for longer than one gala. Nadine checked her phone twice. Both times the message she read made her expression shift slightly. The shift of someone receiving information they have been waiting for. And 3 times in 11 minutes, Nadine's gaze moved to Warren. The same automatic quality as before. The compass needle, the gravity. The 3rd time, Warren's gaze moved back. Just for a moment. Just a flicker. The communication of two people who have become so accustomed to being careful that the caution itself has become invisible. But not to Claire. "I see you," she thought. "I see both of you." The award presentation began at 9 o'clock. Warren walked to the stage with the ease of a man who has never once questioned his right to be at the center of any room. He spoke into the microphone with warmth and precision. He was funny. He made the room laugh twice in the first minute. He acknowledged Claire specifically. He turned toward her table, and 300 people turned with him, and he said, "My beautiful wife, who has given everything to make this evening possible, and who is giving me the greatest gift of my life in 2 months." 300 people looked at her. She smiled. The room applauded. She smiled and she felt the applause wash over her, and she looked, just briefly, across the room to where Nadine was standing. Nadine's face did something complicated. Not grief, not guilt. Something colder than either. The expression of a woman who has been waiting for a particular moment and has just watched that moment go to someone else. The expression of a woman who thought she had already won and has just been reminded that winning requires the other person to have lost, and the other person is still standing. Claire held Nadine's gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked back at Warren on the stage and kept smiling. "He loves neither of us," she thought. The thought arrived without drama. It was not devastating. It was almost clarifying, like a lens coming into focus. "We are both serving a function. I am the public architecture, she is the private life. And he has built both so carefully that neither of us has seen the full structure until now. But I am seeing it now." She was a litigator for 9 years. She knew what a case looked like when it was ready to be made. At 9:43, Claire excused herself. Not to the powder room off the main ballroom. That one would be full of women touching up their lipstick and making small talk. She went to the ladies' lounge on the 3rd floor, the quiet one off the mezzanine corridor. She knew about it because she had managed this event for 3 consecutive years. She knew every corridor of this building. She took the elevator to 3. She walked down the corridor. The carpet was thick enough to swallow sound completely. The wall sconces were low and warm. Behind her, 32 floors above and 3 floors below, a gala continued without her. She pushed open the door to the ladies' lounge. Empty, she locked the door. She sat on the upholstered bench in front of the vanity, and she let herself feel it. The grief came first, not the anger. The grief. Because she had loved him. That was the part nobody's script prepared you for. When the story of your marriage starts rearranging itself, the first casualty is not your future. It is your past. Every memory becomes a question. Every good moment becomes a crime scene. You start looking for evidence of the lie inside the things you were certain were real. The trips to Italy in year one. Was she already there? The night he came home late smelling of a restaurant she did not recognize and said it was a work dinner, and she believed him. How many of those nights? The way he stopped touching her at 4 months pregnant. Tiredness, he said. The development deal in Phoenix was brutal. She had believed him because she was also exhausted and because believing him was easier than not believing him. How many times had she chosen the easier thing? Stop, she told herself. Not here. Not yet. You can fall apart properly later, in a room with a locked door. Right now, you think. She sat up straighter. She opened her evening bag, her phone, her lip balm, the earring, and a credit card in her own name, Claire Holt. She had maintained this card since before the marriage. Her mother had told her to. Always have your own card, Claire. No matter what. She had thought her mother was being paranoid, a product of her generation. She had kept the card anyway because arguing with her mother about it felt like more effort than just keeping the card. She was grateful now with the specific gratefulness of a woman who almost ignored good advice. She opened her phone. She went to her email. She had Foundation Administrator access. Had it for 3 years. Warren had given it to her at the beginning of her first year managing the Gala and never revisited that decision. He had never considered what administrator access meant to someone with a legal background. He had never considered what she was capable of because he had never considered her a threat. Ruth's words in her ear. She scrolled through the event calendar. Not just weeks, months. She cross-referenced Nadine's name in the event notifications with the travel calendar she also had access to. Warren's travel calendar, which she managed because she managed all of it, because that was what she did. The Mexico City conference. Nadine attended as hotel division representative. Warren flew in 1 day early. The Dubai hotel opening. Nadine led the division team. Warren extended his stay by 3 days after the official events concluded. The Napa Valley donor retreat. Nadine organized the accommodations. Warren drove up separately, said the road cleared his head. The Chicago Design Summit. Nadine presented the hotel division's expansion plans. Warren stayed at the Ashworth Chicago. Nadine's expenses that quarter included 3 nights at the same property. She found 14 events in 18 months. 14. She was home for every one of them. Home with morning sickness. Home planning the nursery. Home managing the household and the foundation and the correspondence and the schedule of the man who was apparently elsewhere. The signs were all there, she thought. Every single one. I saw them. I picked them up and turned them over, and I put them back down. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was being insecure, difficult, the kind of woman who looks for problems in a perfectly good marriage because she does not believe she deserves good things. I gaslit myself so thoroughly he barely had to do it at all. The baby kicked. Hard, a decisive movement just below her ribs. I know, she whispered. I know. She sat in the quiet ladies' lounge and she gave herself exactly 15 minutes. She had always believed in giving grief what it asked for, and not 1 minute more. This was not coldness. This was the particular discipline of a woman who knows the difference between feeling things and being consumed by them. At the 15-minute mark, she looked at herself in the mirror. I'm not crazy, she thought. I know what I saw. I know what this is. She said it out loud quietly to her own reflection. Not as a question. As a fact she was recording. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. I know exactly what this is. The woman in the mirror looked back at her steadily. She touched up her lipstick. She smoothed her hair. She breathed once more. Then she stood. 33 years old. She had passed the bar exam on the first attempt. She had argued before the state appellate court at 28. She had won 7 of her last 8 trials before she walked away from the law to become Warren Ashworth's wife. She picked up her evening bag. She opened the lounge door. The mezzanine corridor was dim and quiet. She walked toward the elevator. She was perhaps 20 steps from the button when a man rounded the corner ahead of her. He stepped back. He said, "Pardon me," and he looked at her face, and something shifted in his expression. Something careful and deliberate. He reached into his inside jacket pocket. He produced a card. He held it out to her in the specific way of someone who has been waiting for a particular moment. She took it. Thomas Weir, financial correspondent. The Atlantic Register. Mrs. Ashworth, he said, I've been trying to reach your husband's office for 8 months. They've returned every call unanswered. He paused. He chose his next words with precision. I want you to know that whatever happens tonight, I am writing a piece about the Ashworth Development Group's capital accounting structure and about the retail investors who lost money on the Alderton Heights project. I thought you deserved to know that someone is asking those questions. He did not elaborate. He did not ask her anything. He nodded once and walked past her toward the stairs. Claire stood in the corridor. She looked at the card. 8 months. Warren had mentioned Thomas Weir twice this week. Don't engage with him if you see him at the gala, he had said. He's a hit job journalist. Nothing he produces is credible. She had filed it away without examining it. Warren had a list of journalists he considered hostile. She had never questioned the list. She put the card in her evening bag. Next to the earring, she pressed the elevator button. The car arrived. She stepped in. She watched the mezzanine doors close. She looked at her reflection in the mirrored elevator walls. 2 things in her evening bag now that had not been there when the night started. Evidence and a way out. She went back into the ballroom, and everything was different now. Not the room. The room was exactly as she had left it. The same 300 people, the same gold light, the same orchestra playing something understated in the far corner. Everything was identical. She was different. She moved through the crowd and she looked at Warren, and she saw not her husband but a performance. A very skilled, very expensive, very convincing performance. She separated it from the substance beneath it the way she used to separate a deponent's presentation from what they were actually saying. He was managing 2 parallel realities simultaneously. That required a specific kind of intelligence. She had always known he was intelligent. She had admired it. She had found it attractive. Now she observed it with clinical detachment and felt something she had not expected to feel. She felt almost sorry for him. Not fully, but a sliver of it. Because a person who has to maintain 2 entire realities simultaneously never actually lives inside either of them. He was always managing, always calibrating, always performing. Even in the private life with Nadine, he would be performing the man who chose her, and in the public life with Claire, performing the devoted husband. He was never simply anywhere. She wondered if he knew that. She scanned the room with new eyes. The Henderson family, Warren's longest business partners. Their wives had always been slightly cool to Claire, polite but distant. She had attributed it to social hierarchy. Old money and new. She understood it differently now. They knew or suspected, or had seen something at some previous event and filed it away the way decent people file away things they don't want to be responsible for knowing. Warren's assistant Colin, 6 years with the company. He always looked slightly pained when Claire called the main office number. She had thought he was simply an anxious person. She understood the particular pain in his expression now. The event photographer. Hired by the foundation. Recommended by Nadine's division. She had been gravitating toward Nadine's corner of the ballroom all evening, getting very good candid shots of Nadine laughing with donors, building a visual record of a woman at the center of the foundation's world. Nadine had been planning her own architecture. For some time, how many people in this room, Claire thought, are watching me and knowing things I don't know? The answer was almost certainly most of them. She had been the last to know, probably by a significant margin. She spotted Petra near the back entrance. Petra Cole was not a gala guest. She was a high school music teacher who drove a 7-year-old Honda and spent her weekends gardening and going to farmers markets and saying exactly what she thought to exactly the people who needed to hear it. She was not the kind of person who attended $500 per plate philanthropy galas. She was standing near the back entrance, still in her coat, scanning the room with the specific expression of someone who received a frightening text message and drove across the city. Because she had. Claire had texted her from the bathroom. I found something. I'm okay. Can you come? Petra had come. That is what a best friend does. Claire navigated through the crowd carefully. She reached Petra and they embraced, and Petra held her for a moment longer than the greeting required. You okay? Petra said into her ear. No, Claire said. But I'm going to be. Petra pulled back. She looked at Claire's face. She was reading it the way she had always been able to read Claire's face, since they were 20 years old and sharing a terrible apartment with one working burner on the stove. Then Petra's expression changed. Something crossed it that Claire did not immediately identify. Claire, Petra said, I have to tell you something. Okay, I should have told you before now. I didn't know for certain, and I was afraid of being wrong, and I was afraid of what it would do to Petra. Stopped. She started again. Last March. I was at the Harrington Hotel for a colleague's retirement dinner. I was waiting for the elevator. I saw them at the bar, Warren and Nadine, and she paused again. It was obvious what it was. The way they were sitting, the way he touched her arm, silence between them. I told myself maybe I was misreading it, Petra said. I told myself I wasn't close enough to be sure. I told myself maybe it was nothing. And then I thought about telling you, and I thought her voice broke slightly. I thought, what if I'm wrong and I blow up our marriage over nothing? What if you don't believe me? What if I lose you? She stopped. I'm sorry, Petra said. I should have told you. I know that. I'm sorry. The betrayal was smaller than Warren's. It was made of very different material. Fear instead of desire. Cowardice instead of cruelty. But it was a betrayal nonetheless, and Claire felt it sit alongside the larger one in her chest. She thought about it for one moment. Then she said, why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, and then I'd lose you either way. Another silence. I believe you now, Claire said. That's what matters. Petra exhaled. What are you going to do? Claire opened her evening bag. She showed Petra the card, then the earring, then the note she had been building in her phone, the 14 events, the timeline. Petra stared at the phone screen. She looked at the earring. She looked at Claire. You compiled a timeline, Petra said slowly, in the bathroom upstairs, while 7 months pregnant, at the gala, while this was all happening. Old habits, Claire said. Petra blinked twice. God, I've missed lawyer Claire. And something happened that Claire had not expected. Not tonight, not for hours yet. A small, startled laugh escaped her. Just one. Just a short exhale of absurdity. The kind of laughter that arrives precisely because nothing is funny and everything is. They stood side by side at the back of the grand ballroom. The orchestra played. Warren moved through the room 30 feet away, his hand on someone's shoulder, his laugh arriving on cue. And Claire felt for the first time in a very long time like herself. Not Warren's wife. Not the foundation coordinator. Not the woman in the custom midnight blue gown. Just herself. Claire Holt, with her best friend, seeing clearly. Then she looked across the room. Nadine Cross was looking directly back at her. Not guiltily. Not with apology. With the particular expression of a woman who believes she has already won. Patient. Certain. The expression of someone who has looked at a board and calculated several moves ahead and concluded the game is already decided. Oh, Claire thought. You think this is already over. She held Nadine's gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a friendly smile. The smile of a woman who has just decided something. She turned back to Petra. I'm going to need you to go home and be available by phone, she said. Tonight is going to be a long night. Petra looked at her. What are you going to do? What I should have done the moment I found that earring, Claire said. I'm going to think. At 10:15, Claire Ashworth left the gala. She did not slam a door. She did not raise her voice. She did not walk up to Warren in front of his 300 guests and tell him what she had found. She did not make a scene. She had no interest in a scene. She said goodnight to Ruth Ashworth. She pressed the old woman's hand and Ruth squeezed back and looked at each other for a moment, and nothing more needed to be said between them. She collected her coat from the coat check. She walked through the lobby of the Ashworth Grand. Her husband's hotel, his name above the door, his face in the framed portrait in the corridor near the executive offices, his empire in every direction. She went out through the side entrance, not the front. The front had photographers. She walked to the front desk. She requested a room. She gave her name as Claire Holt. She put it on her own credit card, the visa that had been quietly, patiently waiting in her evening bag for exactly this kind of night. Room 714, she took the elevator up. She unlocked the door. She went inside. She locked it behind her. And then she allowed herself to fall apart. It came in waves, the way it does when you have been holding yourself together in front of people. The first wave was just shaking. Her hands, her shoulders, the trembling that arrives when the body finally processes what the mind has been managing. The second wave was tears. She had not cried at the gala. She had not cried in the ladies' lounge. She had not cried in the elevator. She cried now. She sat on the edge of the bed in the hotel room, and she cried with the specific grief of a woman who has just watched something die that she had been trying to keep alive for a very long time. The third wave was sound, a low, wrenching sound that came from somewhere she did not recognize in herself. She pressed a pillow against her face, not because she was ashamed of the sound, because she was in a hotel and other people lived in proximity, and she had decided, at some point in her 20s, that her pain was hers, and she would manage who witnessed it. The baby was very still. The baby, who had been active and insistent all evening, had gone quiet, as if aware that this was a time for stillness. I know, Claire whispered. She pressed her hand to her belly. I know this is a lot. I'm scared too. I want you to know that. I am actually genuinely scared. She paused. But I'm also going to figure this out, I promise you. You and I are going to be okay. I need you to trust me on that. She gave herself 15 minutes. She had a rule about this. At the 15-minute mark, she went to the bathroom. She ran the bath. She did not change clothes. She lowered herself into the tub in the hotel robe, the thick white cotton absorbing water immediately. And she sat in the hot water, and she stared at the white tile ceiling, and she let herself simply exist in the warmth for a few minutes. The baby kicked once, gently, a single small movement. Claire watched the ripples move across the surface of the water. She did not think about anything specific. She thought about warmth, about the sound of water, about the particular relief of heat when everything else is cold. She stayed in the tub until the water cooled, and the decision she had been forming since the mezzanine corridor had finished forming. She got out, she dried off, she put on the fresh robe, she ordered room service, soup and bread because her body needed something and she was 7 months pregnant, and soup and bread were the most honest things she could think of. While she waited for the food, she opened her laptop. She had carried it in her tote bag. She had carried the tote bag to the gala because she managed the foundation's administrative details, and she always had the laptop. Warren had noted it once, early in their marriage, with mild amusement. You carry that thing everywhere. She had smiled and said old habits. He had let it go. She opened the foundation's shared drive. She opened the Ashworth Development Group's financial folders. She had access because she was a foundation administrator, and the foundation shared infrastructure with the parent company. She had access, and she had had it for 3 years. And she had never once looked beyond the foundation's own files, because she had never had reason to. She had reason now. She started reading. She was not a forensic accountant, but she had represented clients in securities disputes. She knew what clean books looked like. She knew what managed books looked like. She knew the difference between a legitimate reserve fund and a fund that existed to absorb costs that would otherwise appear in a different column. She started taking notes. The Alderton Heights project, $42 million raised from retail investors between 3.5 and 4 years ago. The public investor documents projected a 48-month development timeline with a 14% annual return. She found the internal project schedule. It did not match the investor documents, not in timeline, not in projected costs, not in the development phases. The internal documents showed a project had been scaled back significantly from what investors were told. The actual projected return, based on the real cost structure, was closer to 6%. And the timeline was not 48 months, it was 60 to 72 months. That was in the internal documents. The documents that were never shown to the people who invested their savings. Her food arrived. She signed for it without opening the door fully. She ate soup standing at the table, reading. The bread was good. She ate 2 pieces. At 11:22, she picked up her phone. She called Thomas Weir. He answered on the second ring. "I've been looking at some things," Claire said. "I think you should know what I'm looking at." A silence. "Careful. Mrs. Ashworth Holt," she said. "My name is Claire Holt. Can you talk right now?" "Yes," he said. "I can talk." "Good," she said. "Because I think we have some things in common." Thomas Weir was methodical. She appreciated that immediately. He did not jump at what she was offering. He asked careful questions. He wanted to understand what she had access to, how she had obtained it, and whether her access was legitimate. 3 years of authorized administrative access, she told him, documented through the company's own IT records. "I've never exceeded my authorized permissions. Everything I'm looking at, I have been authorized to look at. And you have a legal background. 9 years as a litigator. I know the difference between looking at documents I'm authorized to see and obtaining documents through improper means. I haven't done anything improper. My husband forgot what I'm capable of." Weir made a small sound. It might have been the beginning of a laugh, contained quickly. "What are you seeing?" she told him. She was precise. She cited document names. She cited specific figures. She cited the discrepancy between the retail investor prospectus for Alderton Heights and the internal project schedule. She cited 3 other projects where similar discrepancies appeared in the documents she could access. She did not speculate. She did not editorialize. She stated what the documents showed and let him draw his own conclusions, because she was not a journalist and he was, and the conclusions needed to be his. They talked for 1 hour and 38 minutes. At one point he asked, "Why are you doing this?" She considered the question honestly. "Because I spent 3 years making myself small so that his life could be large. And the thing he owed me in exchange for that arrangement was honesty. He couldn't manage that." She paused. "And because I have a daughter coming in 2 months, and I would like her to know that her mother, when the moment arrived, did the right thing. You know what this will do to your financial situation. I know what it will do to his, she said. Mine I can manage. I've managed things before. A silence on the line. I need to ask you something, Weir said. Have you spoken to a family law attorney yet? That's exactly what I'm about to do, she said. Good night, Mr. Weir. She ended the call. She looked at the time. 1:23 in the morning. She found Foster Hale's number in her phone. Warren's number. She had it because she had called it over 3 years on foundation business. She had never called it for personal reasons. She called it now. It rang 4 times. Then his voice, the careful, measured voice of a man in his late 50s who has learned to answer calls at any hour without revealing what he was doing before the call arrived. Foster, she said. It's Claire Ashworth. I'm in room 714 at the Grand. I need family law counsel. A long pause. Are you safe? He asked. Completely. Another pause. She could hear him thinking, the careful, thorough thinking of a man who had spent a career managing complicated situations. Claire, he said, I represent Warren. You know that. I know, she said. But I also know that what I've been reading tonight may involve securities misrepresentation, potential wire fraud, and material discrepancy between investor documents and internal project records. And I know that if you were aware of those things and did not advise appropriate action, your bar admission is implicated alongside his liability. She paused. I thought you deserved to know what I know before Warren does. A very long silence. The longest one yet. I'll be there in 45 minutes, Foster said. She made tea while she waited. The hotel room kettle took 3 minutes to heat water that was barely adequate. The tea bag was the kind that comes in a paper envelope with a string. She stood at the window with her mediocre tea and looked at the city. Her husband's name was on the building she was standing in. His name was visible on 5 other buildings from this window. His name was on the hospital wing that the foundation had funded 3 years ago, the dedication ceremony of which she had organized, for which she had written his remarks. By morning, she thought, that name is going to mean something different. She took a sip of the mediocre tea. I deserved better than this, she thought, not bitterly, just truthfully, the way you would state any fact. I deserve better, my daughter deserves better, and starting over feels impossible, but staying feels worse. She held the thought up and examined it. She waited for it to hurt. It didn't. It just felt true. She finished her tea, she went back to her laptop, she kept reading. Foster arrived at 2:17. He was in a suit. He was always in a suit. He looked at her sitting at the hotel room table with her laptop and her legal pad and her cup of cold, inadequate tea, and his expression did something she had never seen it do in 4 years. It looked, she thought, very much like respect. He sat down. He read what she showed him. He read slowly and carefully, and his expression moved from careful to alarmed, to something she could only identify as the face of a man reconsidering a situation he believed he understood. How long have you had this access? He asked. 3 years. And he forgot what I'd know how to look for, she said. He thought I was managing event catering and donor newsletters. He forgot I spent 9 years reading corporate documents and legal disputes. She paused. He forgot I'm a lawyer. Foster was quiet for a moment. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to help me file correctly, to protect my daughter's financial future, regardless of what happens to his assets. And I'm asking you, as someone who has worked alongside Warren for 25 years, whether you want to be standing next to him when this becomes public, or whether you'd rather have already done the right thing. He looked at her steadily. I can't represent both of you. I know, she said. You'll have to choose. I'm giving you time to choose before morning, because I think that's the decent thing to do. And I need you to know that I'll be filing with or without you. I'd simply prefer it to be with you. Foster Hale sat with that. He had the look of a man making a decision he had perhaps been waiting to make for longer than tonight. He opened his briefcase. He took out a legal pad. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning, all of it. Downstairs in the penthouse suite, Warren Ashworth returned from the Gala at 11:45. He found the room empty. He called Claire's phone. It rang and went to voicemail. He tried again. He sent a text. He waited for 10 minutes with the particular impatience of a man not accustomed to waiting for things. He called Petra. She answered after 3 rings. She's safe, Petra said. Her voice was entirely without warmth. The specific warmth removal of a woman who has decided to be precisely and only factually helpful. She's taking care of herself. I think this would be a good night for you to think carefully about your choices. Warren stared at his phone. He called Nadine. Nadine was in her apartment on the 14th floor of the same building. He had approved her housing allowance 2 years ago. She answered on the second ring. He told her Claire had left, that she was not answering her phone, that he was not sure how much she knew. Nadine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the measured tone of someone controlling their own alarm, she probably just needed air. Pregnancy does that. She'll be back in the morning. She knows, Warren said. A silence. How much? Nadine asked. I don't know. Another silence. Longer. Call Foster in the morning, Nadine said. First thing. Don't do anything before you talk to Foster, he agreed. He poured a drink. He stood at the penthouse window and looked at the city with the expression of a man who has just noticed, for the first time, that the ground beneath him might not be as solid as he had believed. He went to sleep. He set his alarm for 7:30. 2 floors below him, his wife was awake. She and Foster worked through the night. They ordered room service at 3 in the morning. Sandwiches and coffee and orange juice, because Claire was pregnant and Foster was 60 years old, and neither of them could work properly without food. They ate while they worked, Claire explained. Foster asked questions. His questions were precise, and she answered them with the same precision. By 4 in the morning, Foster had made 2 phone calls of his own, to a colleague in family law, to a colleague who handled regulatory matters. He did not share details. He asked questions. He listened. He thanked them and hung up. By 5, he had drafted a conflict of interest notice. He would file it by email in the morning. Cop to the Bar Association. His resignation as Warren's counsel on the grounds of a conflict that had become apparent tonight. This will end our professional relationship, he said. I know, Claire said. I'm sorry for that, he looked at her. Don't be, he said. I should have looked more carefully at those Alderton files 18 months ago. I was told they were being restructured for legitimate reasons. I accepted that. I should not have accepted that. He paused. I think I knew, in the way you know things you don't want to examine. Tonight I'm examining it. Claire nodded. By 6, she had also done the following. She had documented her asset analysis in a format that her new family law attorney Foster had referred her to Barbara Wren, who was the best in the city and would take her call first thing could use as a starting point for the marital estate analysis. She had backed up the relevant documents to a personal cloud account she had maintained since her law practice days. She had sent a careful factual summary to Thomas Weir's editorial team email, noting that all documents included were from sources she was authorized to access. She had called her sister Beth in Portland at 5 in the morning. Beth had answered immediately, which is what Beth always did, and had said without preamble, "Come here when you're ready. You can stay as long as you need." And she had called Dr. Ann Morrow, her OB-GYN, whose emergency line she had in her phone because Dr. Morrow was that kind of doctor. Dr. Morrow had answered at 5:30 and listened and asked 3 brief questions about Claire's physical state and said, "You're doing well. Your body is managing this. Just keep breathing and drinking water and call me if anything changes." Her voice was steady and warm and ordinary, and it was exactly what Claire needed at 5:30 in the morning. At 6:15, Thomas Weir sent a message. "The piece is written. Fact-checking underway. We go live at 9 a.m. unless you advise otherwise." Claire read it. She typed back one sentence. "Don't hold." She put the phone down. She closed the laptop. She looked at Foster. "You should go home," she said. "Get a few hours of sleep. You have a busy day." He stood and put on his jacket. He paused at the door. "Claire," he said. "For what it's worth." He stopped. "Start again. You handled tonight with extraordinary composure. Thank you, Foster. Barbara Wren will take your call at 8. I'll send her a brief message before then." He left. Claire stood at the window. Dawn was beginning, that specific gray-blue light that arrives before color. The city was quiet. She could see her husband's name on the building across the street. She thought about the woman who had arrived at this hotel 6 hours ago. The woman in the midnight blue gown with the earring in her evening bag and the journalist's card and the specific calm of someone who has just decided to stop being afraid. She was still that woman. She was also something more than that woman now. She had worked through the night. She was 7 months pregnant, and she had not slept, and she had just potentially changed her life entirely. And she felt underneath the exhaustion a clarity she had not felt in 3 years. This, she thought, is what I used to feel like before a major hearing. This exact clarity, this exact focus, the sense of having done everything you can do and now the morning is coming and whatever it brings, you are ready. She had forgotten this existed in her. She had not lost it. She had only set it aside. At 9 o'clock, the Atlantic Register published Thomas Weir's piece. The headline read, "The Ashworth Ledger Inside 2 Decades of Investor Misrepresentation." It was 4,200 words. It named figures, projects, and people. It included documents that were described as obtained from authorized internal sources. It quoted 3 former Ashworth development employees. It quoted a retail investor from the Alderton Heights project who had lost her retirement savings. By 9:15, Warren's phone was ringing with calls he had not received before. By 9:22, the Ashworth Development Group CFO sent a resignation email to the board. He cited personal reasons. His personal reasons were, Claire suspected, his own attorney's advice. By 9:43, major investors had issued statements to financial press requesting an immediate accounting of project finances. By 10 o'clock, a regulatory body had opened a preliminary inquiry into the Alderton Heights capital raise. By 10:15, Nadine Cross had stopped answering her phone entirely. Claire knew all of this because Foster was sending her brief updates from outside the building, where he had gone to make phone calls. She was still in room 714. She had changed into the clothes Petra had brought her at 7 in the morning. Pregnancy jeans. A soft gray sweater, her own boots. The clothes of Claire Holt, not of Warren's wife. She had eaten breakfast, real breakfast. Eggs and toast and orange juice from room service, eaten at the table where she and Foster had worked through the night. She ate slowly. She watched the city get lighter. Her phone was ringing. Warren, she did not answer. Colin, his assistant, she did not answer. An unknown number that was probably a journalist who had tracked down her cell, she did not answer. At 10:22, there was a knock at the door. Claire, his voice. Through the door, quiet. The specific quietness of a man who is being careful in a public corridor. She stood. She walked to the door. She opened it. He was in yesterday's clothes. The black tie loose, the silver cufflinks gone. He looked like a man who had slept badly for a few hours and then woken to the thing he had been dreading. He looked, for the first time in a long time, like a person rather than a performance. She looked at him for a moment. She noticed the jaw. She noticed the eyes. She noticed the particular expression of a man who has just understood what he has lost and is hoping he can still negotiate. "We need to talk," he said. "We do," she agreed. "My attorney will be in touch with yours once you find one." She paused. Foster filed a conflict notice this morning. Something moved across his face. The first real crack in the composure. "Foster." "Good night, Warren," she said. She closed the door. She stood on the other side of it. She listened. She heard him stand there for a moment. She heard him exhale. She heard his footsteps moving away down the corridor. She heard the elevator chime distantly, then quiet. She pressed her back against the door. She put her hands on her belly. She breathed. That is the before, she thought. And this is the after. She waited for the grief to come. Some of it did. A small, quiet wave of it. The particular sadness of an ending, even an ending you have chosen. Even an ending that was necessary. 6 years, a marriage, a life she had believed in. But underneath the sadness, she was surprised to find something else entirely. Relief. Clean. Enormous. Almost dizzying relief. Like setting down something very heavy that you had been carrying for so long you had forgotten you were carrying it. The absence of it was remarkable. The lightness. She pushed off the door. She picked up her phone. She called Petra. "It's done," she said when Petra answered. "All of it? Enough of it." A pause. "How do you feel?" Claire thought about it honestly. "Like myself," she said. "I feel like myself." 3 weeks later, Claire was in Portland. Beth's house was yellow. It had been yellow since Beth bought it 6 years ago and painted it without consulting anyone, which was very Beth. There was a garden going dormant for winter. Brown stalks and dried seed heads, and the particular beauty of things that have finished blooming and are resting now. There was a dog named Humphrey who had decided within 4 hours of Claire's arrival that she was his specific responsibility. He followed her from room to room. He rested his chin on her knee when she sat. When she cried, which she did, in private, on several occasions in the first 2 weeks, he was always there, warm and uncomplicated and steady. Claire slept 9 hours a night. She ate Beth's cooking. She took afternoon walks along the river when the weather permitted, which was not always, because Portland in November was mostly gray and wet and absolutely beautiful in the way of things that do not try to be pretty. She had appointments with Barbara Wren twice a week by video call. The divorce proceedings were underway. The marital asset analysis was complex and would take months. Warren had retained a team of 3 attorneys. Claire had Wren, who was one person and had never once lost a case she prepared properly. Claire was not worried. She was tired. She was sad sometimes. She was also increasingly and without apology, okay? She got a call from Foster on a Thursday afternoon. She was sitting at Beth's kitchen table with a cup of actual good tea. Beth kept a whole shelf of real loose-leaf tea and Humphrey at her feet. "Nadine Cross has been in contact," Foster said. "Not through her attorneys. Directly. She has asked to meet with you." Claire listened. "She says it's not about the investigation," he said. "Her cooperation with the regulatory inquiry is already complete and on record. She wants to speak with you personally. She made clear she understands if you refuse." Claire looked at the wet garden through Beth's kitchen window. The brown stalks, the gray sky, I'll think about it, she said. She thought about it for 3 days. On the fourth day, she called Foster and told him yes. They met at a coffee shop. Neutral territory. Not Warren's neighborhood. Not Claire's former neighborhood. A small place on the east side of the city with good coffee and enough ambient noise for privacy without requiring raised voices. Nadine Cross arrived before Claire. She was sitting at a corner table in jeans and a gray coat. No red dress. No gala composure. She looked smaller, tired. The particular tiredness of someone who has spent several weeks being afraid. Claire ordered coffee. She sat down. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The ambient noise of the coffee shop continued around them, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of other conversations, the front door opening and closing as other people came in from the cold. I want to explain something, Nadine said. Not to excuse it. Just to... She stopped. Started again. I didn't know about the accounting. The regulatory filing named me because my signature is on the divisional reports. But accounting sent me those reports finalized. I signed what I received. I did not know what was underneath the numbers. Claire waited. I know that may not matter legally, Nadine said. My attorneys are working through it. But I wanted you to know it personally. She paused. I have been cooperating with the investigation fully. Voluntarily. I gave them everything I had. Another pause. Because whatever else I am, I will not be his shield. A silence between them. He told you the marriage was over, Claire said. It was not a question. Nadine looked at the table. He told me you'd grown apart, that the marriage had been empty for years, that you stayed for stability, and he stayed out of responsibility. She looked up. He said it with such certainty, such detail. It sounded like something he had thought about carefully. He's good at that, Claire said, making things sound like they have been carefully considered. It's one of the things I admired about him. Once. Nadine was quiet. He told you what you needed to hear, Claire said. He told me what I needed to hear. Different things. For different purposes. But the construction was the same. She held her coffee cup. He loved neither of us. We were both functions he was running. I was the public life. You were the private one. And he was never fully present in either place because he was always managing both. Nadine looked at the table for a long moment. Yes, she said finally. I think that's right. Another silence. I'm not going to be your friend, Claire said. I don't have enough of that right now. And you hurt me in ways I'm still sorting through. But I'm not going to carry hatred for you either. That's not something I can afford. I have a daughter coming. She paused. Take care of yourself. Do what's right with the investigation. That's all I have. Nadine nodded. She picked up her coat. She stood. She paused. Your daughter is going to be lucky, she said, to have you. She left. Claire sat alone at the corner table. She finished her coffee. She watched the door swing shut behind Nadine. She watched the coffee shop continue around her. Ordinary. Ongoing. She found sitting there that she felt something she had not expected. Not triumph. Not vindication. Not the clean satisfaction of being right. She felt something quieter. Sadder and more honest. She felt sorry for Nadine Cross. Not in a way that absolved her. In a way that recognized another person who had been used by the same man in different ways. Both of them serving a function. Neither of them truly seen. Warren had built a life that required two women to be less than they were so that he could be more than he deserved. That was the real crime. The financial fraud was the legal crime. This was the human one. She put on her coat. She walked out into the Portland gray. She walked 2 blocks to the river. She stood at the railing and looked at the water. She thought about the bathroom on the 3rd floor of the Ashworth Grand. She thought about 15 minutes of grief and then standing up. She thought about the elevator going down and the lobby and the journalist's card and the credit card with her own name on it. She thought about a night of work. She thought about a door she had closed. She thought about relief. The water moved below her, gray-green and purposeful. She pressed her hands to her belly. The baby, her daughter, her Margaret, moved against her palms, steady and persistent and there. We're okay, Claire said. She was not performing comfort. She was not managing her own fears. She actually meant it. They were okay. Margaret Claire Holt was born on a Tuesday, 23rd of January. 6 pounds and 11 ounces. Dark hair plastered flat against a perfectly round head. Fingers that curled with immediate precision around Claire's own. The expression of someone who has arrived somewhere important and is assessing the situation. Claire lay in the hospital bed and held her daughter and felt the specific enormity of the moment that every new mother feels and that no description entirely captures. The weight of a person in your arms who did not exist before and now does. The responsibility and the terror and the love, which arrives not gradually but immediately and totally, like a door opening onto a room that has always been there. Hello, Margaret, Claire said. Petra was in the room. She was crying in the particular unashamed way that Petra cried, which was freely and without apology, and while simultaneously saying she was not crying. Beth was there. She held Claire's hand through the last hour and did not say a single unnecessary word. Ruth Ashworth called the following morning. She called Claire's cell, not the hospital room line. She said congratulations in a voice that was warmer than Claire had ever heard it. She said, I had a trust document prepared for Margaret's education. It will be sent to your attorney. Claire said, thank you, Ruth. A pause. She will be wonderful, Ruth said. With you raising her. They said goodbye. That was Ruth's apology. Imperfect, partial, delivered through lawyers and a trust document rather than through words. But present. Claire accepted it. The spring came. Warren's legal situation was exactly what the attorneys had predicted it would be. Complex, slow. He had resources, and he was deploying them. The regulatory inquiry was ongoing. The civil claims from retail investors were being consolidated. A resolution was likely 18 months away at minimum. He was not in prison. These things rarely move that quickly, but he was not the man whose name meant something unqualified anymore. When people said Ashworth now, they said it with a pause afterward, a beat of uncertainty. The kind of pause that once attached to a name does not easily detach. Nadine Cross had received a formal censure from the regulatory body. Her division VP role was gone. She had accepted a position at a smaller hospitality company in another state. She had complied fully with every request from investigators. This had shaped her outcome significantly. Claire knew this because Foster told her. She did not seek the information, but she accepted it when it came. She accepted many things now, not with resignation. With the particular openness of a person who has learned that acceptance is not the same as approval, you can accept a fact without endorsing it. You can look at a complicated outcome and say, yes, this is what happened, without needing it to have been otherwise. She went back to law in April. Margaret was 4 months old. Claire had been reading case summaries on her laptop during nap times for 6 weeks before she admitted to herself what she was doing. She was not keeping up with developments. She was not curious about the field abstractly. She was missing it. She called Barbara Wren. I want to come back, she said. I don't know in what capacity. I'm not ready for full-time litigation, but I want to be doing something. Barbara Wren did not hesitate. I have 3 cases that need a research attorney with your background, she said. All family law, all involving financial complexity in marital estates. You would know this material better than anyone I could hire. Claire said, when do I start? Monday if you want. She started Monday. Beth's spare room had been quietly converted into an office over the previous 2 months. A good desk, a good lamp, shelves for files, a compact crib against the far wall where Margaret slept during work hours. It was not the office she had occupied as a partner-track associate. It was not impressive. It was a spare room in her sister's yellow house in Portland. It had a view of the dormant garden, which was less dormant now. Green was appearing, the kind of tentative, determined green that arrives in March in the Pacific Northwest. Insisting on itself in the gray. She liked working in this room. She liked that she could hear the sounds of the house while she worked. Beth in the kitchen. Humphrey's nails on the wood floor. The particular quiet of the afternoon when Margaret napped and the whole house settled. She liked that her work was useful. The cases Barbara sent her were women. Women in complicated divorces. Women trying to understand what had happened to their financial futures. Women sitting across from attorneys feeling overwhelmed by the language of their own situations. Claire understood that overwhelm from the inside now. She had been 7 months pregnant and alone in a hotel room at midnight, building a case with her own hands because her survival required it. She brought that understanding to the work. On a Wednesday morning in May, she was on a video call with a client. The woman was 51, 28 years of marriage, a business her husband had built with her contributions but registered only in his name. She was describing the assets in the technical language her attorney had given her, and she was clearly not entirely understanding what she was saying, and Claire recognized something in the woman's eyes. The look of someone who has had an experience larger than the available vocabulary. Let me explain this differently, Claire said. She explained it in plain language. What the asset classification meant, what the wife's potential claim was, what the process would look like. She watched the woman's expression shift from lost to oriented, the look of someone who has found their footing. After the call, Claire sat back. Margaret was in the crib across the room, asleep on her back, arms flung wide in the specific abandonment of infant sleep, perfectly trusting, perfectly present. Claire looked at her daughter. She thought about everything that had led to this room, this morning, this work. She thought about the earring in the pocket of the jacket on the bathroom door, She thought about the elevator going down. She thought about the ladies' lounge in 15 minutes and standing up. She thought about Foster's face when he arrived at room 714 and saw what she had built overnight. She thought about the door she had closed. She thought about the moment she had pressed her back against it and felt the relief. The hardest years of my life, she thought, have made me a better lawyer. Not because suffering was a gift. It was not. Nobody should go through what she went through. She did not endorse the path. She would not choose it. She would not recommend it. But she had gone through it. And she had not let it make her smaller. She had not let it take her clarity or her competence or her particular precise way of seeing through things. She had not lost herself. She had only misplaced herself for a while. She caught a movement across the room. Her own reflection in the dark laptop screen. Her reading glasses. Her hair pulled back. A pen in her hand. A coffee getting cold on the desk because she had forgotten it was there. She looked at herself for a moment. She barely recognized the woman. Not because she looked different. Because she looked like herself. The version of herself that existed before she made herself small. The version that had argued cases and crossed witnesses and stayed late and worked hard and known, with quiet certainty, what she was capable of. There you are, she thought. I was wondering where you'd gone. The gala had happened in November. It was now May. 6 months. Warren's name was still above the door of the Grand. It would remain there through legal proceedings that would take years. She had made her peace with the slowness of institutional justice. She understood it. She had always understood it. What mattered was not the speed. What mattered was the permanence. She had filed. She had documented. She had done the work on a single night in a hotel room with mediocre tea and a laptop and a foster hale who made the right choice when it mattered. That work did not disappear. It lived in the regulatory record and the civil court filing and the article that had been cited 14 times in subsequent reporting. She had done the work, and then she had stepped back and let the work do what work does when it has been done correctly. She had left the room. That was the thing nobody told you about justice. The real kind. Not the dramatic movie kind with speeches and public humiliation and satisfying single moments of reversal. The real kind was quieter. It lived in documents, in records, in the permanent fact of things that had been established. She had established them. And then she had come to Portland and eaten her sister's cooking and let a dog follow her from room to room and had her daughter and started again. That was it. That was the story, not a triumph, not a performance. Just a woman who was treated badly and declined to remain where she was being treated badly, who used the skills she had and the resources she had and the knowledge she had and built something different, something actually hers. Margaret woke from her nap. The small sound she made when waking was particular to her, a soft, preliminary murmur, testing the air, establishing that someone would answer. Claire went to her. She lifted her daughter from the crib. She held her against her shoulder. Margaret blinked at the room with the unfocused, interested gaze of a 4-month-old who is considering everything, taking inventory. "Good morning," Claire said. "Or afternoon. It's afternoon, actually. You slept well." Margaret put her fist against Claire's jaw, an exploratory gesture. "The world is interesting and I am touching it." "Agreed," Claire said. "The world is interesting." She walked to the window. The garden was greener today than it had been yesterday. Things grew here in spite of the gray, because of the rain that seemed excessive until you saw what it produced. She thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, the woman in the midnight blue gown, the woman who had straightened her husband's jacket out of habit and found what she found. She did not hate that woman. She did not pity her. She was grateful for her. That woman had held herself together in an elevator, had walked into a gala with an earring in her evening bag and a smile on her face, and had observed, with extraordinary precision, exactly what was happening and who was doing it. Had given herself 15 minutes to grieve and then stood up. Had called a journalist and a lawyer and her best friend and her sister and her doctor. Had worked through a night. Had closed a door. Had come to Portland. Had built this. The prison door had been unlocked all along, she realized. She had just needed the right night to try the handle. And she had tried it. And walked through. And here she was, standing at a window in a yellow house in Portland, her daughter on her shoulder, the garden growing, the work she loved on the desk behind her, her sister in the kitchen below, doing something that involved clattering pans and a song she was singing quietly to herself. She pressed her cheek against the top of Margaret's head. "We're okay," she said. Margaret grabbed a strand of her hair with both hands. Decisive, certain. Claire laughed. The real kind. The kind that meant something. "We're okay," she said again. And this time saying it, she felt exactly what it was. Not a comfort. Not a performance. Not something she was telling herself to manage fear, just the truth. The simple, hard one genuinely felt truth. They were okay. They were better than okay. They were exactly where they needed to be.